For centuries, sailors swore it was real. They said it rose from the black water without warning, dragging entire ships beneath the waves, and that its arms alone were thick enough to crush a hull like it was made of driftwood. They called it the Kraken, and for a long time the rest of the world laughed the story off as exactly that. A story, a myth born from too much time at sea and too much rum in the belly. But here's the thing. Almost nobody wants to admit. The Kraken was never entirely fiction. Underneath the legend was a real animal, swimming in real ocean, and in the last few months alone, scientists have filmed it alive for the first time in history, tracked it in places it hasn't been seen in over 25 years, and confirmed that it may be even bigger than anyone ever imagined. This is the story of how an ancient sea monster turned out to be one of the most real and least understood giants left on planet Earth. To understand why the Kraken legend refused to die for so many centuries, you have to understand just how little of the ocean humans have ever actually seen. Even today, with satellites orbiting the planet and submarines capable of diving deeper than Mount Everest is tall, more than 80% of the ocean remains completely unmapped and unexplored. For most of human history, that number was essentially 100%. Sailors crossing open water had no way of knowing what lived beneath their keel beyond a few dozen meters down. All they had were the things that occasionally surfaced, the things that occasionally washed ashore, and the things that occasionally reached up out of the dark and pulled something or someone under. Norwegian and Icelandic sailors told stories of the Kraken for hundreds of years, describing a creature so massive that its back could be mistaken for a small island, so powerful that its arms could reach up and drag a fully rigged ship down into the depths in a matter of seconds. For a long time, that description sounded like pure exaggeration, the kind of tale that grows a little bigger every time it's retold around a fire. Except it wasn't pure exaggeration. Because deep in the world's oceans, at depths most submarines rarely bother to visit, there really is an animal that grows to a size most people would refuse to believe if they hadn't seen the measurements themselves. Scientists call it Architeuthis dux, the giant squid. And for centuries, it was the single best real-world candidate behind every Kraken legend ever told. Recent scientific estimates put its maximum body length, from the back fins to the tip of its longest arms, at around 16 feet for females, with males running slightly shorter. That's already an animal longer than a small car. But that measurement doesn't even include the two long, specialized feeding tentacles that a giant squid keeps tucked in close to its body most of the time. Tentacles that, when fully extended, can stretch out to roughly 33 feet on their own. Add that to the rest of the body, and you get a creature whose absolute total length, arms and tentacles included, has been measured on real physical specimens at up to 43 feet from tip to tip. 43 feet. That is longer than a city bus. That is an animal capable of stretching from one end of a bowling lane to the other and still having room to spare. And that's not even the theoretical upper limit. Marine biologists have developed a newer method for estimating maximum possible size in giant squid. One that doesn't rely on finding an intact specimen, because intact specimens of an animal this size are almost impossible to recover from thousands of feet underwater. Instead, researchers use the size of a giant squid's beak, the one truly hard, non-decomposable part of its body, which frequently turns up preserved and undigested inside the stomachs of sperm whales that hunt these animals in the deep dark. By measuring beak size across a huge number of samples and comparing it to body measurements from known specimens, scientists have calculated that a giant squid could theoretically reach a total length of up to 66 feet. 66 feet. That's over 20 meters. That's longer than 2 full school buses parked end to end. No one has ever documented a living giant squid anywhere close to that size in the flesh. But the math says the ocean has almost certainly produced individuals that big at some point. Animals whose remains simply never made it into a lab, whose only evidence of existence is a beak fragment sitting in the stomach of a whale that ate them 1,000 meters down. And here's where the story gets even stranger, because the giant squid isn't even the biggest squid in the ocean. That title, at least by weight, belongs to a different, even more mysterious animal called the colossal squid, scientific name Mesonychoteuthis hamiltoni. Where the giant squid wins on raw length thanks to those long whip-like tentacles, the colossal squid wins on pure mass and bulk. Its body, not counting the arms and tentacles, is far more robust and muscular, built less like a long ribbon and more like an actual sea monster. Combined body and tentacle length for a colossal squid has been measured at up to roughly 46 feet, and its body alone can weigh more than 1,100 pounds, over 500 kilograms of solid, deep ocean muscle. Some researchers believe even larger colossal squid may exist in the wild, individuals that could weigh well over 600 kilograms, animals whose combined weight would rival a small car, hiding in the freezing black waters of the Southern Ocean, where almost nobody has ever managed to get a proper look at them. And when it comes to sheer, alien-looking features, the colossal squid doesn't just win on weight. It also has the largest eyes of any known animal in the history of life on this planet. Not the largest eyes of any living animal, the largest eyes ever recorded, full stop, living or extinct, with the sole exception of certain ancient marine reptiles called ichthyosaurs that swam the oceans back when dinosaurs still walked the land. A colossal squid's eyes can reach up to roughly 12 inches across, close to 30 centimeters, each eye roughly the size of a soccer ball, sitting on either side of a head built to survive crushing pressure and near total darkness thousands of feet below the surface. Scientists believe those massive eyes exist for one very specific reason: to detect the faint bioluminescent glow given off by one of the colossal squid's most dangerous natural predators, the sperm whale. Whose movement through the water at depth can disturb tiny light-emitting organisms and create a faint telltale shimmer. In other words, this animal evolved eyes the size of dinner plates for one single purpose: to see death coming in absolute darkness just early enough to have a chance at surviving it. For most of scientific history, everything we knew about these two animals, the giant squid and the colossal squid, came entirely from dead specimens. Bodies that washed up on beaches, half-digested remains pulled from the stomachs of sperm whales, the occasional badly damaged individual hauled up accidentally in a fishing trawler's net from waters far deeper than any human diver could survive. Nobody had ever filmed a living, healthy giant squid in its own natural deep-sea habitat until 2004. But even after that milestone, one creature remained stubbornly, maddeningly unfilmed in the wild. The colossal squid, the heaviest invertebrate on the planet, an animal humans had known about since 1925, had never once been captured on camera alive in its own natural deep-sea environment. Scientists had studied dead specimens. They'd studied specimens pulled from whale stomachs. They'd studied juveniles found near the surface and adults recovered from fishing operations. But nobody in the entire history of ocean science had ever pointed a working camera at a living, swimming, healthy, colossal squid in the deep water where it actually lives. That changed only this year, in the summer of 2026, when researchers finally achieved what generations of marine biologists had been chasing for exactly 100 years. A colossal squid was filmed alive in its natural habitat for the very first time in recorded scientific history. It is, without exaggeration, one of the single biggest breakthroughs in the study of deep-sea giants in living memory, a century-long chase that finally paid off. Think about what that actually means for a moment. Humans have walked on the surface of the moon. We've sent probes past the edge of our solar system. We've mapped the human genome down to the individual base pair. And yet, until just months ago, we had never once laid eyes on a living colossal squid in its own home. That's not because the animal is rare in some absolute sense. Researchers actually believe colossal squid populations may be reasonably large and reasonably widespread across the deep waters of the Southern Ocean. It's because the environment that animal calls home is almost impossibly hostile to human observation. Crushing pressure, permanent darkness, freezing temperatures, and depths that push well past the operational limits of most manned and even unmanned research vessels. The colossal squid wasn't hiding because it's rare. It was hiding because it lives somewhere humans are barely capable of visiting, let alone filming. And the giant squid, the animal most closely associated with the original Kraken legend, has had its own remarkable resurgence in the headlines recently, though in a very different way. Just weeks before the colossal squid was finally filmed alive, marine researchers working off the coast of Western Australia made a discovery that stunned the scientific community for entirely different reasons. Using a technique called environmental DNA analysis, essentially filtering seawater samples and scanning them for genetic material shed by animals swimming through that water, scientists detected clear, confirmed evidence of a giant squid living in Australian waters, in a location where the species had not been recorded in more than 25 years. Oh, this wasn't a sighting. Nobody saw the animal itself. But its genetic fingerprint was unmistakably there, floating in the water column. Proof that a living giant squid had passed through that exact stretch of ocean recently enough to leave detectable traces behind. Researchers called it the first confirmed record of a giant squid detected off Western Australia's coast using this kind of genetic sampling technology, and remarkably, the northernmost confirmed record of that species anywhere in the eastern Indian Ocean. In the very same survey, using that same environmental DNA technique, scientists identified evidence of 226 different species spanning 11 major animal groups in that one stretch of deep water alone, including species never before recorded anywhere in Western Australian waters at all. The Kraken's real-world cousin wasn't just confirmed to still be out there. It was found swimming through parts of the ocean humans had assumed for over 2.5 decades it had abandoned entirely. What both of these breakthroughs point to, the first ever live footage of a colossal squid and the genetic confirmation of a giant squid activity in previously unrecorded waters, is a much bigger truth that deep-sea researchers have been trying to communicate to the public for years now. The ocean's true giants aren't gone. They were never gone. Humans simply lacked the technology and, frankly, the persistence to actually find them where they live. New deep-sea camera systems, quieter, less invasive, capable of operating at depths and pressures that would have crushed earlier equipment, are finally giving scientists a genuine window into a world that has remained essentially unwitnessed for the entire span of human civilization. And environmental DNA sampling is giving researchers an entirely new way to confirm a species' presence in a given stretch of ocean without ever needing to physically capture or even visually spot the animal at all, just by reading the traces it leaves behind in the water itself, the same way a detective might identify someone from a single strand of hair left at a scene. So how does an animal like this, something that can stretch beyond 40 feet in length and weigh more than a small car, manage to stay essentially invisible to human science for the entirety of recorded history until just now? Part of the answer lies in where these animals actually live. Both giant squid and colossal squid spend the overwhelming majority of their lives at what scientists call mesopelagic and bathypelagic depths, roughly 600 to over 6,000 feet beneath the surface, a zone so deep that sunlight never penetrates it at all. It's permanently, completely dark down there, lit only by the occasional flash of bioluminescence from other creatures. Pressure at those depths is immense, dozens of times greater than what exists at sea level, enough to instantly crush most human-built equipment that isn't specifically reinforced to withstand it. And the sheer volume of ocean at those depths is almost incomprehensibly vast. The deep sea isn't some narrow band of water easily patrolled by a handful of research vessels. It's the largest habitat on planet Earth by an enormous margin, larger than every terrestrial ecosystem on the planet combined, and humans have explored only the tiniest sliver of it. Finding a single animal, even a genuinely enormous one, in a habitat that size, that dark, and that deep, is roughly equivalent to trying to find one specific person somewhere on the entire surface of a continent, at night, with no lights, using nothing but a small handheld flashlight. There's also the matter of how these squid actually behave, which makes them even harder to catch on camera than their sheer size might suggest. Both giant and colossal squid appear to be relatively solitary, actively avoiding areas with bright artificial light, and capable of extremely fast, evasive movement when they sense something approaching. Traditional submersibles, no matter how carefully piloted, tend to be loud, bright, and disruptive, essentially guaranteeing that any nearby giant squid will detect the intrusion and flee long before a camera ever gets close enough for a clear shot. It's part of why the successful 2012 giant squid footage and the 2026 colossal squid footage both required entirely new approaches, quieter propulsion systems, dim red lighting invisible to most deep-sea animals, and an enormous amount of patience, sometimes literally months of deployment time, waiting in the right depth and the right location for the right animal to simply happen to swim past a lens that wasn't scaring it away. It's worth pausing here to really sit with the biology of these animals, because it explains so much about why the old Kraken legends described exactly the kind of behavior modern science has since confirmed. Both giant and colossal squid are equipped with powerful arms, lined with rows of sharp, rotating suckers. And in the case of the colossal squid, some of those suckers are also ringed with small, sharp hooks, capable of tearing directly into flesh, a feature the giant squid doesn't share. Sperm whales, one of the only predators large and powerful enough to regularly hunt these squid in the deep ocean, are frequently found bearing enormous circular scars across their skin, scars that perfectly match the size and shape of a colossal or giant squid's sucker rings, physical proof of just how violent and prolonged these deep ocean battles between whale and squid can genuinely be. A sperm whale diving down to hunt a colossal squid isn't chasing down some passive, defenseless creature. It's engaging in a genuine, high-stakes fight against an animal equipped with its own formidable weapons, an animal perfectly capable of leaving permanent scars on something as massive and powerful as a whale. When you consider that, the old sailor stories about the Kraken dragging ships under and battling anything that came near it start to sound a lot less like pure fantasy and a lot more like distorted, second-hand accounts of exactly the kind of violent encounter that plays out regularly, thousands of feet below the surface, completely unseen by human eyes. And then there's the sheer strangeness of the colossal squid's biology. Details that read almost like something invented for a piece of science fiction rather than something confirmed through actual scientific research. A single female colossal squid may carry over 4 million potential eggs at once, an almost unimaginable reproductive output compared to most other deep-sea species. Researchers believe adult females may migrate to somewhat shallower waters, specifically to spawn, meaning that even an animal built for the crushing pressure of the deep abyss occasionally makes its way towards slightly less extreme depths during key moments of its life cycle, giving scientists at least a marginally better chance of one day encountering an adult in more accessible waters. And genetic sequencing efforts on the giant squid, including a full draft genome published in recent years, have confirmed something that once seemed almost too strange to be true, that despite giant squid populations turning up in oceans scattered all across the entire planet, from the icy waters near Antarctica to warmer regions much closer to the equator, genetic testing suggests they may all actually belong to a single unified species. One species of true sea giant spread across nearly the entire global ocean, genetically connected in ways scientists are still working to fully understand. So what does all of this actually mean for the future of Kraken research, if that's even the right way to describe what's happening in modern marine biology right now? It means the story is far from over. The colossal squid was only filmed alive for the very first time this year, an achievement it took an entire century of dedicated scientific effort to accomplish. The giant squid was only just confirmed, through cutting-edge genetic sampling, to be swimming through Australian waters it hadn't been detected in for over 25 years. Both of these events happened within roughly the same few months of each other, which strongly suggests that new technology, better cameras, quieter and more capable submersibles, and increasingly sensitive environmental DNA sampling techniques are finally starting to catch up to a mystery that has been sitting largely unsolved at the bottom of the ocean for the entirety of recorded human history. Every one of these breakthroughs raises the very real possibility that even bigger discoveries are still waiting out there in the deep dark. Animals whose full size, full range, and full behavior remained completely unknown, simply because nobody has yet managed to get the right camera in the right place, at the right depth, at the right moment. Because here's the thing worth remembering above everything else in this story. Every single measurement scientists currently have on record for giant and colossal squid, every documented length, every confirmed weight, every recorded eye diameter, comes from individuals that were either already dead when they were found, or that happened to wash up somewhere accessible, or that got tangled in a fishing net by pure chance, or, as of this year, that happened to swim directly into the narrow beam of a deep-sea camera during one of the very few expeditions ever specifically designed to look for them. None of those measurements can possibly represent the true, absolute upper limit of how large these animals can actually grow in the wild. The math based on recovered beak fragments already suggests giant squid could theoretically reach lengths approaching 66 feet, more than 4 times longer than anything ever actually filmed alive. And if an animal that large has never once been captured on camera, what does that really tell us? It tells us the biggest ones, the true giants among giants, are almost certainly still out there, patrolling the deepest, darkest, least explored stretches of open ocean on the entire planet. Animals that may live out their entire lives, born, growing to a size beyond anything currently on record, and eventually dying, without a single human being ever catching so much as a glimpse. There's also a deeper historical thread running through this story, one that connects the modern science directly back to the exact same waters that produced the original Kraken legend centuries ago. The sailors who first told these stories weren't spread randomly across the globe. The most detailed, most vivid Kraken accounts came overwhelmingly from Norway and Iceland, from fishing communities working the cold, deep waters of the North Atlantic, exactly the kind of environment where giant squid are now known to actually live. These weren't tropical waters or shallow coastal shelves. They were deep, cold, nutrient-rich seas, the same conditions modern marine biologists now recognize as prime giant squid habitat. These weren't drunken tall tales spun for entertainment. They were, in many cases, genuine attempts by working sailors to describe something they had actually encountered, using the only reference points available to them: folklore, scripture, and their own frightened imaginations. Because the real scientific vocabulary to describe a 16-foot cephalopod with eyes the size of dinner plates simply didn't exist yet. It's also worth understanding just how differently these animals experience the world compared to almost anything most people are familiar with, because that difference in biology is part of why they proved so resistant to human observation for so long. Giant and colossal squid don't have bones. Their bodies are almost entirely soft tissue, muscle, and cartilage, which means a dead specimen begins decomposing and losing its true shape almost immediately after death, making early scientific descriptions notoriously unreliable and inconsistent. Their nervous systems are also genuinely unusual by vertebrate standards, built around a distributed network that gives portions of their arms a startling degree of independent, localized control, allowing rapid, complex movement without every single action needing to be individually processed by a central brain first. Combine that with a soft, flexible body capable of squeezing through surprisingly narrow gaps, a remarkably fast jet propulsion for rapid retreat when threatened, and skin capable of some degree of color and texture change for camouflage in low light. And you get an animal that is, in almost every practical sense, extraordinarily well engineered to avoid ever being seen by anything it doesn't want to encounter, humans very much included. A less easily startled species, but that almost guaranteed a giant squid would sense the intrusion and flee the area long before any useful footage could be captured. Researchers eventually realized that most deep-sea cephalopods, including giant and colossal squid, are largely insensitive to red wavelengths of light, since red light doesn't travel far or usefully at those depths in nature, and their eyes never evolved strong sensitivity to it. That single insight, swapping bright white lighting for dim red lighting essentially invisible to the animals themselves, became one of the critical breakthroughs that finally allowed researchers to get close enough, undetected, to capture genuine footage of a live giant squid back in 2012. And it played a similarly critical role in finally achieving the first ever live colossal squid footage in 2026. Alongside quieter, less intrusive propulsion systems designed to minimize vibration and noise in the water, these lighting innovations represent decades of iterative engineering, generation after generation of research teams learning from failed attempts, refining their approach, and slowly closing the gap between human technology and an animal that had spent millions of years evolving specifically to avoid detection in its own environment. What's particularly striking is how recent this entire wave of breakthroughs actually is, and how tightly clustered together in time. The first live footage of a giant squid in its natural habitat happened only in 2012, within the living memory of most people watching this right now. The confirmed genetic detection of giant squid activity off Western Australia happened only this past May, and the first ever live footage of a colossal squid anywhere in the world happened only this past June. 3 landmark moments in the history of deep-sea giant research, separated by roughly a decade for the first, and by mere weeks for the last 2, all clustered at what increasingly looks like the beginning of a genuinely new era in ocean exploration. For the better part of 100 years, all from the moment the colossal squid was first formally identified back in 1925 to the moment it was finally filmed alive in 2026, an entire century passed with almost nothing to show for it beyond the occasional dead specimen. And then, within the span of just a handful of years, technology and persistence finally converged to blow that entire drought wide open. If that pace of discovery continues even remotely close to its current trajectory, the coming years could bring a wave of new footage, new genetic detections, and quite possibly entirely new size records for animals that spent the whole of human history hiding in plain sight. At the bottom of the one habitat on this planet we've always understood the least. The Kraken was never gone. It was simply waiting in the dark for the rest of us to finally catch up. That is the real, modern version of the Kraken story, and in some ways it's even more astonishing than the original myth ever was. The ancient sailors who told tales of a monster capable of dragging entire ships beneath the waves weren't entirely wrong. They were describing, however imperfectly, distorted through fear and distance and the retelling of stories across generations, animals that genuinely do exist, genuinely do grow to sizes that defy easy belief, and genuinely have only just, within the last few months, finally been caught on camera alive in their own natural world for the first time in the entire history of human civilization. The Kraken was never a myth invented from nothing. It was a real animal, hiding in the one place on Earth humans have never fully been able to reach, and after 100 years of searching, we are only now, for the very first time, finally starting to see it.